Welcome to the third episode of Voice It. My name is Lina and I will be your host for today.
Hi, I'm Zynab and I'm one of the children nurses who work in children's A&E.
My name is Aisha and I'm a psychologist and I currently work for a mental health helpline.
The focus for today's episode is dyslexia, which is a learning disability that approximately 10% of the UK's population struggle with. Now, both Aisha and Zynab, who have joined me today, are two individuals who have their own stories to share regarding their experience dealing with dyslexia. So if we hand over to Zynab first.
So I was diagnosed with dyslexia when I was around about in year 6, so I think I was 12 years old. I was 12 years old when I got diagnosed with dyslexia. It did change a lot for me in the way that I was taken out of school in certain situations like exams and SATs. So I had to go out of my class, had to sit with the teacher, had to talk to her about different things, ask her to read to me, which was quite weird at the age of 12, and ask her to write for me. So I found it very odd, very isolating, compared to different students looking at you, getting bullied in certain situations. But that was in year 6. So when I was in year 6, it was a bit more chilled. If that, I can't really say.
If you don't mind me asking, you mentioned you were diagnosed at, was it year 6? Yeah. At the time, did you actually understand very much about it?
I just knew I couldn't read.
I can imagine.
Couldn't read.
Yeah, it must have been quite peculiar to have to be removed in those situations.
Oh yeah.
Something you didn't really understand.
Oh yeah, I didn't understand any of it. I was only 12 years old. How was I meant to understand what certain letters were and why my eyes decided to merge with letters and why I couldn't read in certain situations compared to everybody around me. So like everybody around me would like stand up in front of the class and say, "Oh, I'll read this," and then have to read a line outside. If I had to do that, I swear to you, see a puddle on the floor. I would have like sweat pouring down me. I couldn't do it. It was really nerve-wracking. Still to this day I can't read out loud. So it's still difficult, the way of reading. So most of dyslexia you can struggle in many different ways, and I'm sure I shall tell you.
Yeah.
You can struggle with reading, writing, or memory, and it'll be completely different.
Yeah.
In so many different ways. With mine, it's reading and spelling. So I struggle with all that kind of way of spelling and reading. In year 6, it wasn't that bad because I was only a child. But as I gradually got older and I became a children's nurse, it was a struggle. And that's when it became a bit more difficult to actually manage it and actually deal with it on a normal day basis.
You mentioned that people can struggle with dyslexia in different ways. So, Aisha, is there anything you'd like to input there?
So there are a lot of different ways people can struggle with dyslexia. So things like spelling, like Zynab's mentioned, memory, reading, writing. So you often find when you're trying to read something, you can read a whole sentence or a whole book and you don't know what's being said. So although you can read, you've not comprehended. And perhaps someone can, read something a couple of times and it will stick in their brain. Somebody with dyslexia just cannot memorize unless they understand the actual concept of what's being said. So there are a lot of different ways. I mean, I know for me, one particular example is when I was back in primary school was the desk I'd sit on would have a B and a D and it would be written bed because I always got the two mixed up.
I did that.
Yeah. So that's something that I actually still use, and I'm actually a working professional now, but that's still something that's like I use to sort of remember. So I do struggle with alphabet, the sequence of things. I will struggle with things like that. And I think Zynab made a really good point saying, in primary school you are sort of in a sheltered community where everyone's there for you, you are getting the help that you need. Yeah. But as soon as you grow up a little bit and, maybe if you enter into high school and you're like, well, I know in high school it's quite popular to go around the class reading a book. It really, really, it can cause a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, and at that age you don't realise what's happening and why am I feeling like this, and it kind of can cause a lot of isolation and it is really sad. But I think 9 out of 10 times what you need to do is make somebody aware, you know, I am feeling like this and this is what's happening. And I found whenever I've asked for help, I have got the help that I need. So I think that's really key to remember.
Yeah, it's always key to ask for help when you need it. You kind of have to just go with it. If you know you're dyslexic, then you say it.
Yeah.
If you kind of, at the end of the day, if you don't say you're dyslexic and you hide it, most people will just look at you like, oh, okay, so what's going on?
I think people aren't able to understand.
Yeah, they don't. They look at you in the way of it's a weird look they give you, and if you don't say it out loud, it's like they know something's wrong. They know that something's going on with you, but they can't actually figure it out. And they will just look at you and they will judge you for the fact that you can't actually say what you want to say, or you can't spell what you want to spell, or you can't read it out loud until you actually say it. Yeah. And that might be a bit hard to understand for everybody else.
I know. I mean, a good example of not saying it is me at work. So when I was working, we have a lot of files that we need to put back in alphabetical order after using them during the day. And what had happened is I put them back, and even though I'm sat there trying to do it, and I know my work colleagues are watching over me, so I am trying to put all these files away. But one of my colleagues complained to the manager saying, whenever Aisha's putting the files back, it seems they're not in alphabetical order. So it comes across as maybe I was being lazy, or I wasn't really paying any attention to what I was doing.
But because you haven't spoken up about you're
so when I got called into the office and I was like, right, it's time to sort of say. So I spoke to the manager and I said, well, I suffer with dyslexia, so it's a little bit harder for me to sort of put these things back into order. So, she made the rest of the group aware, and, this is something that we have to work. So now, after talking about it, I actually have work colleagues who help me put things away, or they'll say, oh, I'll do it.
Support it.
That's a really beautiful thing to hear.
Yeah, it's really, really nice.
I think, from the perspective of someone who doesn't have dyslexia, I would imagine that, it must feel quite nerve-wracking to have to open up to someone about those type of things, because you mentioned earlier the worry about being perceived differently, as you've mentioned, Aisha, sometimes opening up to people, rather than being perceived as someone who's unable to do something, people will be able to understand that it just requires a little bit of extra support to help someone go a lot further.
100%. But I think I've always been able to actually just say it, because around me I've had it for such a long time. I've got used to going, oh yeah, I'm dyslexic.
It's quite normal for you.
It's quite normal for me to just go, yeah, I'm dyslexic. So like at work, I'll be doing some kind of work. Usually it's like triaging, and I'm with a child, and I've gone ahead and put it into the computer, put it into our system, and sometimes spell check helps, but not always have it. Not always there. So I think I had a student nurse in me a couple of weeks ago, and she was over my shoulder, and she was just looking at what I was writing, and I wrote something wrong, which was so easy to spell, and I think it was like pencil or something. Yeah. So it was so easy to spell, but I just spelled it completely wrong, and she just giggled, and she went, you spelled that wrong. I was like, I know, I'm just dyslexic, and that's it. And she's like, oh, okay. I was like, I just kind of just openly say it. It's easier to do it.
I think that is actually, in my opinion, it might help more when people are a lot more open about things, because I think when people are more reserved about things, it kind of could potentially cause almost a stigma of, oh, this is something we shouldn't talk about. And in my opinion, I don't believe that would really help people who do suffer with or who have to deal with dyslexia, learning more about how to cope with it in their everyday life and incorporate those type of elements into what they do daily. So I do think the more people are outspoken about things, I understand it's very hard. It must be hard to open up, even if it's irrespective of whether it's a learning disability. Just generally, I think with people, we struggle to say what we find difficult. It's not something we really tend to want to just speak about more. But with things like this, I do believe that the more outspoken we're able to become about them, the easier it will be for people to, from an outside perspective first, it will be easier for people to understand it a lot more and work better on how to support things.
I think with, you know how you just said like with it being a learning disability,
Yeah.
that's what scares people. So
Yeah.
the word learning disability terrifies people because it all of a sudden shows that person, wow, I've got a disability.
It's the label, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the label of a learning disability. Even if you say dyslexia doesn't sound as bad as learning disability.
Yeah.
It's not meant to it's not a bad word to say it. It just makes people feel
it's more the stigma
like,
attached to it.
yes, there's a
isn't it?
big massive stigma saying you've now got a disability, but at the end of the day, even if you've got a learning disability, you can accomplish so much.
Well, I will say, I think you're both prime examples of that.
Thank
because you know
you.
you both come really far.
I mean, I would like to say that, dyslexia, if that was something that I was to explain to someone, I feel it's got nothing to do with somebody's intelligence or their abilities.
No, definitely.
It is just a way of processing information. That's where the issue is, how we process it.
Yeah.
But in terms of your intelligence or your ability, I don't think you should ever let something like that get in the way, because that's not the case.
At the end of the day, if you're dyslexic or if you've got a learning disability or you kind of got any disability, it's going to be a part of you. You have that choice of letting it define who you are and letting it actually make you and actually take it to a point where you can actually accomplish something in life.
Now that what you both just said there reminds me of a quote that was said by someone who featured in one of our Voice It magazines. Her name was Amina, and she suffered with cystic. She avoided saying she suffered because for Amina, it was very much similar to the ideology you've both mentioned, in that she said cystic fibrosis doesn't have me, I have cystic fibrosis. So I think that in itself highlights the change of mentality, and rather than, as you said, allowing something like that to define you, you essentially define yourself and understand that, as you mentioned, people just simply have different ways of processing things. People, not everyone's the same, so whether that's in our physical makeup, whether that's mentally, whether that's the way we process information, our differences aren't necessarily put there to cast us away in a different label.
Exactly. Yeah.
At the end of the day, struggling with dyslexia and trying to overcome it is not a way that you can overcome. You just kind of you deal with it and manage it, and you go with it in so many different ways.
You sort of learn how to live your life, your day-to-day life.
Rather than overcoming, you simply learn to incorporate. I think, again, as you both mentioned, the more you learn to deal with things, and the more you accept something like that, the easier it is to deal with it, I'd imagine.
100%, but it's not always the case where people say, you know how we were discussing earlier about if you tell someone, people can be more understanding. Even if you tell someone, sometimes people aren't understanding. And I've had that in my case in different kind of situations, especially in university, and my experience throughout being in placements and being a student nurse, especially people who see student nurses don't realise that they can have dyslexia, or it's very rare you see student nurses with dyslexia. There is quite a few, but they don't usually open up about it, and that when they don't, it kind of makes them crumble in a way, and it does put a bit of it affects them a lot, and you can get to a point where you can't even finish your course. So with mine, I opened up about my dyslexia. I was able to open up about my dyslexia, but they would believe that I was incapable of actually becoming a nurse, and incapable of actually adapting to certain situations, and I wasn't able to spell in certain situations. I wasn't able to write quick enough, and I wasn't able to read certain doctor notes. But that came with time, and because I had to learn over time, and I had to gain their trust and show them that I was actually capable of certain situations, and actually capable of learning and adapting to emergency situations and day-to-day situations. They couldn't see it of my capability. They had to look at it in different ways, and they didn't understand my process of learning.
Something I did want to ask is, I think a lot of the time what may happen is sometimes people simply don't know how they can support you best. So if I know from my perspective, if someone were to open up to me about something and they'd expect my support, I'd want to know how best I could actually support them, because for sometimes people might assume support is simply verbally saying, it's okay, you can do this, don't let this get you down. But I think sometimes, from a psychologist's point of view, maybe I'm assuming, maybe constantly saying, it's okay, you can deal with things even though you've got this, might make someone have more of a negative image of themselves.
Exactly.
And I just wanted to ask, in your opinion, based on what you maybe felt that like you needed at a particular time in your life, or a particular time where you found yourself finding things a bit difficult, what would you say is the best way for people to try and support others who suffer with, deal with dyslexia?
That's a really good question, actually. I know the British Psychological Association and the local British Association, which are both, can be found online. They have a bunch of webinars and training sessions and so much information regarding those supporting people with dyslexia, because I feel the main people that do deal with people who are dealing with dyslexia are parents and teachers. It does come down to them quite a lot.
That's really interesting. No idea about that.
Yeah, so those are two very useful websites. But I feel, as a psychologist, and the impact that dyslexia has on your mental health, you often find people with dyslexia suffer from anxiety. Social situations really scare them. They have a low confidence, low self-esteem. So these things do really impact them, and I feel for feelings like that of low moods, and there's even behavioural issues. For example, when you're at school and you've seen all your friends have been able to spell. I remember I was in year 3 and I once got 0 in a spelling test, and I just sat there and cried. Do you know what I mean? But what happened was, when I went home, I was really unhappy and angry as a child. So, behavioural issues like anger problems, you come home and you're very frustrated with yourself because you don't understand why.
Especially at that age, you really wouldn't understand why.
And, even if someone said, well, you've got dyslexia, well, I don't, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't really
I think
mean.
even at the age of, even at the age of 15, 16, I would still act that way. Even now, I'm not going to lie, even now, if I can't read, I've had books in front of me, any kind of book, if I can't read it in front of me, and I can read certain paragraphs, and then all of a sudden I just stop and I stumble, I will start going, why can't I read it? I can't, why am I not able to actually read this? And I try to break it down, and sometimes even then I can't, and all of a sudden I'll look around me, and the people around me will be like, oh, this is how you read it, and then your head kind of kicks in, and you're like, why are you so dumb? Why can't you do it?
Yeah.
And you kind of just go into this feeling of, oh, okay, so you're that stupid that you can't read it. But then you have to look at it in a way of, okay, wait a second, I've actually got a learning disability. I need that support. I need someone to help me.
Yeah.
I need someone to actually come and talk to me and help me to understand what that actually means. To be honest, with me, I don't know how your dyslexia works, but with mine is once I've read a letter, I will always remember it.
Yeah.
So, or once I've read a word, most likely I will always remember it. And for some reason, I don't read the word, I will memorise the word.
Yeah.
So, for example, when I was younger, I learned the word. For my uni years, I learned how to spell certain words. Like, this will be like a really random word, but it'll be medical. So it'll be like saturation. I learned how to spell that because of how much I used it, and I learned how to say it because of how much I used it.
It's more the way you process that.
The more I processed it, the more I memorised it.
Yeah.
And I didn't have to think about it.
So have you found that to be the same in your case?
For me, I think I really have to pronounce a word, and I have to keep pronouncing it, understand all the sounds, and then sort of write that down. That really helps me. So it's more
vocal in your
it's more
case.
vocal and more to do with the phonics side of things. So if like the word saturation, I'll really have to sort of go like sort of.
Did you learn? Were you able to learn phonics in a separate kind of?
Yeah, I was. So I was taken out of, especially in primary schools, I was taken out of class and I was taught phonics in a very small group.
See, I never got that. So my phonics, till this day, I think I still mess up on. I can say them.
Yeah.
And I can pronounce a word, but I will find it difficult
to sort of apply it.
Yeah. So I have to it's like I have to merge the word, and it's really difficult.
When you mentioned with the word saturation, you learnt it because you had used it a lot. Did you mean you
used that word?
Or you wrote it?
Both.
Both.
I used to word. I because of my nursing, I used a lot of word saturation all the time.
Yeah.
And I can use different kind of words. I use the word mental health a lot. I use the word help and support and increase or decrease. I use a lot of different words in my day-to-day life and my day-to-day job.
Just to steer back a little bit to the question I had asked previously, what was it exactly, in your opinion, that you think is important for people to understand if we wanted to support others with dyslexia in any way?
I think one of the main things is just go out there and do your own research. Each case is very different. And obviously when if it's your child or your student, you've got them diagnosed, when you read through their strong points and their weak points, you can help them a lot better. But it does come down to a lot of research, and there's so much available online. It is just a click away. But I think something else that's really important is, I understand the question you've asked is how others can support you, but I think more importantly, how can people who suffer from dyslexia support themselves? Support themselves. Psychologically speaking, and from my own experience, there are a couple things. So with dyslexia, I find my mind is really clouded and there's a lot going on. So something as basic as exercise sort of helps clear my mind, and I feel I can reapproach that same task feeling a little bit more calm and with a clear mind. That does really help me. Another thing is anticipation. Anticipation is key. So if you're going into a task or you're going into a situation that you're going to struggle with, prepare yourself for that. Like you've said, you have to have that talk with yourself.
You do.
I'm not going to do 100%, and that's okay. And sometimes I even set myself some mindfulness activities to do after, so I can help relax.
Would you mind giving an example, if that's okay?
Yeah, no, there's so many. One thing that I basically do as much as I can is taking long walks. So, being in nature and taking walks really helps me feel...
Even I find that really therapeutic, just generally. I think a lot of people do.
Yeah, it is really calming. Things like that, sometimes it could be something as like colouring, taking a bath. I know it sounds really simple, but things like that.
But I think that captures the essence of it, really. It doesn't have to be a really big...
It's not rocket science at all. It is really... And, things like that, if you want to help maybe your child or your friend or... your student, maybe give them some activities to help them feel a little bit calmer, because the level of anxiety and overthinking that goes into something that may seem really ordinary and simple to somebody without dyslexia, it is mind-blowing.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I do think it's even more beneficial to highlight that, if there are any of the audience who might also feel like they might have dyslexia and they might be looking for other ways to try and manage it and incorporate it into their life easier in their daily routines. Sometimes they might think, okay, what big step do I need to take to try and deal with this better? But it can really be something as simple as Aisha mentioned, such as taking a walk. In your case, Amy, what would you say helps you feel more relaxed, maybe?
Driving. Because I'm a driver, I can't. I like driving, so anything that happens or anything that goes on and I just need to clear my mind, I just drive. I like driving, so I just drive for a very long time, go to different places, like going on hikes. They usually help, or going somewhere where you can just breathe for a second. Or even if you're at work and you've just struggled for a second and you've really, really, really struggled on typing or reading something, it's taking yourself away from that situation for a moment. So closing that book, going ahead, going outside for a second, giving yourself 5 seconds to breathe in and out, and then going back to it in a minute or two, so that you can just clear your head. Because otherwise, you're just going to bombard yourself over and over again.
It becomes overwhelming.
It becomes very overwhelming.
On that note, I do also think that sometimes the suggestions of other people might help, but I'd imagine that in this case, it's also, in my opinion, quite important to try and find out for yourself what you feel individually will help you. Because a lot of the time, I think as individuals, it's important to just take a bit of time to have that self-reflection and just, really focus on what it is that would help you feel better, because no one will essentially know that more than yourself. So if you don't know where to start, look at other people who might have, faced similar issues and overcome things. And we mentioned before not to mention the word overcome. And I think Zynab had quite a reason behind why she's mentioned that. So if you want to share that, because when you said it to me, I found it quite interesting. I never looked at it in that way.
So for saying overcoming a learning disability, or any kind of disability in fact, it's like saying that you've taken that part away from yourself and you've actually not got that anymore. But saying I am this is a disability, or saying I have this disability and I know how to support myself with this disability, is different than saying I've overcome it, because it's actually still a part of your day-to-day life.
Again, I never looked at it that way, so I would have just said that word and not realised it's completely gone entirely against everything we discussed here. But I've really enjoyed this conversation myself, because
I have a question for you, Zynab. So you mentioned when you were doing your nursing at university, there was a few other nurses that suffered with dyslexia, but they weren't very open about it. Do you feel if more people were open about their experiences, it would mean less pressure for those who do suffer from dyslexia?
Oh yeah, 100%. Because if I had a mentor, for example, who went, oh, okay, I'm dyslexic, and she turned around to me and said, oh yeah, I'm dyslexic too, I know how it feels, I'd all of a sudden feel very calm. I'd feel very like, she understands me, I have something that I can go on.
You don't feel as pressured.
You don't feel as pressured. But I've always had that little pressure where I have to get that spell right. I have to make sure that this is on time. I need to make sure that I can read that. If I can't read that, how am I going to do it? And
do you find that you go into sort of overdrive?
Yeah, you do. You do go into like this overdrive where you're just like, you need to do it. I need to do it. I've got no choice. And you kind of have to force yourself to do it. Even though I've had people turn to me and be like, you can't do this. And
so you're sort of proving yourself.
I have proven myself.
Proving to yourself before you.
You have to. You kind of have to prove to yourself that, okay, I'm capable of this, I can do this, and it takes you a long time to do that. And as soon as you're capable of it, and you're able to do it.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. That was very nice. So I think it's really important to understand that, when more people are open about their experiences and they talk about this more openly, it will help people with dyslexia as a whole.
And I think that's a brilliant point to conclude on, because essentially that's what the entire point of this episode was to speak out about things that other people might feel are a bit too difficult to talk about, and it's about taking that step when other people might struggle to. And on that note, thank you again thank you. I haven't thanked you properly yet at all, so thank you very much for taking that first step and being the people who can be the voice of others who do struggle with dyslexia and who are learning how to manage that within their lives. Just before we conclude, I'd like to quickly introduce our monthly Voice It magazines. Now, this is the second edition, and the front cover features Chris Langridge, who is the UK men's #1 badminton doubles player, I believe.
And then we have Wahida, who's actually a paediatric intensive care nurse, who I really inspire to, because she works in the place that I actually want to work one day, which is a paediatric intensive care unit.
And I think both Chris Langridge and Wahida's stories are truly inspiring. And Wahida being from a BAME background, that is something that is truly something to look up to, and something that is actually really inspiring.
I'm sorry, I'm grinning now because I've just seen one of the quotes. The quote heading is, "Be the CEO of yourself," and I think that just interlinks so perfectly with everything we discussed today. There's a lot more really fun things in this magazine, especially the easy chicken biryani recipe, which I'm going to try and implement. Probably fail, but it's fine, it's the effort that matters. Once again, thank you so much for joining me on here today. It's been a real pleasure to have you both, and I feel like personally I've learned a lot from this conversation.
Thank you for having us.
No, it's been a pleasure. And to our viewers, thank you so much for tuning into today's show, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode.